Welcome back once again for another little journey through an area in the Kanto region. If you're new here, I've made some videos about Lavender Town, Cinnabar Island, and the Kanto Power Plant, and this has kind of turned into its own little series that I did not originally intend to make. But these have been a lot of fun to work on, and you all seem to enjoy them, so let's examine another place that I find to be quite interesting and or memorable. But two things real quick before getting to the video. Firstly, I truly wanted to thank all of you for watching these little videos I've thrown together over the last 4.5 years. Crazy enough, this video right here is actually my 100th video, and I am just very appreciative and even a little impressed with myself that I've managed to keep going after all this time. I still enjoy making these, so I don't see myself going away anytime soon. So really, thank you all again, and here's to 100 more. Then I'll stop. Just kidding. Secondly, another enormous thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. I'll give proper shoutouts at the end of the video, but I just wanted to mention that it exists right here in the beginning if you so choose to feel the need to support the channel with more than just a view. I have some Paraspectre stickers to give away, some stamped Parasect cards, silly little perler bead things I made, and thanks to the idea given to me by Scott's Thoughts, I assign virtual cards in those end of video shoutouts by going in card number order. Kind of personalizes things a little more. Here are the next cards to be assigned. Neat! The link is below, so now that that's out of the way, let's discuss video number 100. It's the late 90s and you're just checking out this new Pocket Monsters game, whatever this thing is. You select your starting Pokemon with your options being a green frog thing with a bulb on its back, an orange lizard dinosaur guy with a fire on its tail, or a bald blue turtle. You learn the ins and outs of catching and battling, meet some weird professor who gives you a computer gadget to keep track of these creatures, and then you're off on your journey. You pass some rats and birds along the way, reach a super scary forest full of bugs, until you find yourself in yet another residential area, Pewter City. In Pewter City is one place to explore of the Museum of Science, which has some fossils you can look at of an Aerodactyl and Kabutops, and hear about something called a Moonstone.
That's no moon. It's a
Moonstone. This city has a gym, and in this gym is the rock leader, Brock. If you took Bulbasaur or Squirtle, this should be a fairly simple fight due to rock and ground being weak to them. If you took Charmander, you may have some difficulty here. But once you prevail, you can now continue on to the east. This here is Route 3, which has a fair number of trainers ready to fight you with their own bugs and birds and rats. All is going swimmingly. Toward the end is a patch of grass where you can snag yourself a little pink balloon Pokemon, Jigglypuff. But a little beyond that is this lad standing here who mentions something about a tunnel from Cerulean taking a lot out of you. And the sign next to him says, Route 3, Mount Moon ahead. Well, alright, sounds like you're about to enter a cave or mountain or something. Going north of that is actually the next route in numerical order, Route 4. The intro to Route 4 just has some little cliffs, a girl standing outside, and a Pokemon Center at the top. Well, that's kind of weird. So far you've only seen these in towns and cities. The girl tells you that she has been badly injured by tripping over a rocky Pokemon Geodude. I mean, does she want you to go get help? Call an ambulance? Oh, she just keeps walking around. She's fine. But hey, you just gave Brock the business not too long ago, and he had a Geodude, so you know what that is now. But in this girl's horrific agony, you were given some inside baseball. Sounds like you can get a Geodude for yourself here soon. Heading into the Pokemon Center, there are 4 folks meandering around. 2 of them just tell you some tutorial-esque information. Another guy tells you he has a deal for you and that he'll sell you a swell Magikarp for only 500 big ones. What in the heck is a Magikarp? It sounds real powerful.
better take it with you.
But the other man is all dressed up in a suit reading a newspaper like he's on Wall Street. Team Rocket attacks Cerulean citizens. Team Rocket is always in the news. Team Rocket? What's all this then? Street toughs? Ah well, time to check out that mountain tunnel to the right. This here is Mount Moon. And right away, you'll notice the first big change in gameplay. Up to this point, you could only encounter wild Pokemon in the tall grass and were safe on regular paths or short grass. But now you can encounter wild Pokemon on any given square in the entire cave. Nowhere is safe. And compared to the places you've been so far, this place is quite large. You thought Viridian Forest was a maze? This is expert level in comparison. This place has 3 separate floors, all connected by ladders, about a dozen trainers throughout, items to collect, and wild Pokemon absolutely everywhere. Aside from maybe Brock, this is definitely your biggest challenge yet. The intro signpost here tells you to beware, Zubat is a bloodsucker. Well, okay. Am I in danger? The girl next to the sign is just waiting for her friends to find her, and she has something called a Clefairy. After defeating her, she tells you she heard that there are some rare fossils here. Well, it just so happens that you have a vague idea of what to do with those fossils thanks to the fine folks at the museum. Another trainer tells you there are suspicious men in the cave and afterwards says he's sure they are from Team Rocket. Another Team Rocket reference. If you head directly to the left from the entrance, this is where you can pick up a pretty decent TM of Water Gun, a simple 40 power water attack with 100% accuracy. Nice, not bad. Maybe you can teach it to that Magikarp you just bought. Oh, or not. You'll also find some potions for healing, a rare candy for boosting any Pokemon by 1 level instantly, an escape rope to teleport you back to the Pokemon Center if things are looking grim, but also something called a Moonstone. Well, this is Mount Moon, so that sounds like a geographical and geological collectible. But as far as which wild Pokemon you'll encounter here on the main floor, there are 4 different encounters. Easily the most common at a whopping 79% rate is the poison flying type bat Pokemon Zubat that you just learned is a bloodsucker. Zubat is the blue eyeless bat with purple wings that has gained a lot of notoriety for simply being an extremely annoying and common encounter in caves, always trying to use Supersonic or Confuse Ray to cause confusion. And it all started here in Mount Moon with the first place you'll find them. The original Pokédex says, Zubat forms colonies in perpetually dark places, uses ultrasonic waves to identify and approach targets. Zubat is generally quite weak with pretty low stats all around. Its best stat is speed and defense is its worst. I think Zubat has a pretty cool design though, even for just being a bat. But with it being incredibly easy to find and usually annoying to deal with, I feel like you will get sick of seeing Zubat very quickly, even in Mount Moon alone. In the original games, it's also in the Rock Tunnel, Seafoam Islands, and Victory Road. But by the time you reach Victory Road, Zubat is a pretty useless encounter. But it does evolve into Golbat at level 22, and then was given an additional evolution of Crobat in Gen 2, and you'll find Zubat here at levels 6 to 12. 15% of the time, you will find the Rock Ground type rock Pokemon, Geodude, one that you can now catch after destroying Brox and learning about their whereabouts in here. Geodude is simply a 1-foot tall circular gray boulder with eyes, a mouth, and 2 arms. A pretty simple design overall, and yeah, it's not really one of my favorites. It's fine. The original Pokédex says, they are found in fields and mountains. Mistaking them for boulders, people often step or trip on them. Geodude has quite the discrepancy with stats, as it has horrendous speed and special, but excellent defense and pretty decent attack, a typical stat layout for rock types. Geodude are typically found in the same places as Zubat, as you can also find them in the Rock Tunnel and Victory Road, but not at Seafoam Islands. But yeah, I do like how the designers did it, where you see Brock's Geodude for the first time, not knowing where you can get one yourself. If you had some difficulty taking it down if you took Charmander for example, I can see it being one you would like to eventually find because of its high defense, or if you just liked its design. But then, just a handful of minutes later, you can now get one for yourself as you trek through Mount Moon. Geodude evolves into Graveler at level 25, and eventually into Golem if you use a link cable to trade a Graveler to someone. You'll find Geodude here at levels 7 to 10. So that means 94% of the time, those are all you'll find here on the first main floor of Mount Moon. Just an abundance of Zubat with an occasional Geodude. But that leaves 6% for some rare encounters. And of that 6, 5% of the time, you'll find the baby Shroom Boy himself. The bug grass type mushroom Pokemon, Paras. I feel like I don't need to go too much into what Paras is, being the Paraspectre channel and all, but of course it's the little orange crab bug with wide eyes and 2 mushrooms on its back. The original Pokédex says, it burrows to suck tree roots. The mushrooms on its back grow by drawing nutrients from the bug host. Whew, I sure hope those mushrooms don't completely drain the bug host of its life force entirely. That would be terrible. Paras has pretty rough speed and HP, but decent attack and fairly average defense and special. They are only found here or at the Safari Zone, so you may not find them all too often in a playthrough. You may only find 1 or 2 in your entire trek through Mount Moon, so if you want a Paras on the team, and obviously you do, you might need to spend some time searching. Because as we all know, Paras evolves into Paraspectre at level 24. You'll find Paras here at levels 8 to 12. But at an even more rare encounter than Paras is the extremely low 1% encounter rate of Clefairy, the pure normal type fairy Pokemon that eventually had its type changed to pure fairy when that type was created in Gen 6. If you fought that last at the entrance, you know of their existence. Clefairy is a cute little pink roundish Pokemon with stubby arms and legs, pointed ears, and a curl on its head and tail. The original Pokédex says that its magical and cute appeal has many admirers. It is rare and found only in certain areas. And that is correct because you can only find them here in Mount Moon, or as a prize at the Rocket Game Corner in Celadon City. So yeah, they were definitely being captured here to be used as casino prizes. Clefairy has decent HP and special, but pretty low speed and attack and defense. So really, everything in Mount Moon is slow except for Zubat, which makes running away from the rest pretty easy. But Clefairy is pretty much the mascot of Mount Moon. Clefairy lore is very much connected to the moon itself. They are thought to actually be aliens, having originally come from the moon, and they evolve into Clefable when exposed to a Moonstone, the very same Moonstone that you may have found here. There are a total of 5 Moonstones in the original games, as you can only find them on the ground or as hidden items. You'll find Clefairy here at levels 8 to 12. And actually, these 4 are the only 4 Pokemon you'll find here in Red and Blue. Each floor has different percentages of encounter rates and levels, with Subfloor 1 having less Zubat and more Geodude, Paras, and Clefairy, and Subfloor 2 even more so. Zubat are only found half of the time on Subfloor 2, Geodude 30% of the time, Paras 15% of the time, and Clefairy at a whopping 6%. I always really liked the lore of Mount Moon, with the idea that shards of meteorites fell here that you find as Moonstones, and Clefairy being magical moon aliens that can evolve when exposed to the stones. Unfortunately, with you finding so many Zubat in your short time here, it can become a little tedious to get through though. You can't always run from them right away if they are faster than your Pokemon. If you choose to fight them, even though they aren't hard to knock out, they often use moves to cause confusion and give very little experience. So yeah, that can get old pretty quick. But there are also enough trainers here to get some experience as well. Nothing too crazy, and you'll mostly be fighting the same bug catchers and youngsters with Caterpie and Rattata, etc. This always kinda made me laugh, but there's a hiker here too who has 2 Geodude and an Onix. Basically Brock, but with an extra Geodude, so it kinda cheapens his fight that you just did not too long ago. But Brock's were levels 12 and 14, and these are all level 10, so yes, I know, they're weaker. You may also get introduced to a couple new ones that you can't find yet of Magnemite, Voltorb, Oddish, and Bellsprout that a Super Nerd and Lass have. This always had a nice old school RPG feel to it in my opinion. You are gradually introduced to new Pokemon that you haven't been able to find yet, but if you thought their design is cool, you can make a mental note to look for one in the world. That is, if you don't spoil all of it for yourself. I still do this with new Pokemon games too. I don't look ahead of time and just discover them as the game wants them introduced to me, either through wild encounters or trainers. Oh, and come on, I gotta give a shout out to this mad lad here. I came down here to show off to girls. You keep doing you, my guy. And that's pretty much it for the first floor. Going into the floor below though, you'll see some trainers dressed in all black wearing hats. This is your first proper introduction to Team Rocket. One simply says, "We, Team Rocket, are Pokemon gangsters," which really tells you all you need to know. Another says that they are pulling a big job here and to get lost. Well, what sort of big job? Another says, "Team Rocket will find fossils, revive and sell them for cash." The Team Rocket folks here certainly aren't difficult to beat though, as they typically have a lot of lower leveled common ones that you've been seeing, like Zubat, Rattata, Ekans, and even this poor Sandshrew. You leave him alone. But making your way to the very end, you'll be stopped by somebody standing in front of 2 fossils. This is the final trainer of Mount Moon, a super nerd who actually can be a fairly tough fight. He has a Grimer, Voltorb, and Coughing, all at level 12, all Pokemon that could be brand new to you too. Grimer and Coughing can pretty easily poison you, and if you are reeling from the trek through Mount Moon, you might have some problems and can have to start all over back at the Pokemon Center. It's not a crazy difficult fight or anything, but it's entirely possible that you've lost some friends along the way by this point. He tells you that he found those fossils and that they are both his, but once you defeat him, he tells you that you can each take one. No being greedy. What a stand-up gentleman. At this point, all you can really know about these fossils is that they are called Dome and Helix, and that Team Rocket wants to find them for profit. There's no indication of what you're supposed to do with them, where to take them, if and when they will turn into Pokemon, or how. That one Team Rocket member did tell you that they will find the fossils, revive them, and sell them for cash, so it's sounding like they will eventually turn into Pokemon. Of course, this is extremely common knowledge now, and I even already talked about this in this very series in the Cinnabar Island video, but Dome turns into Kabuto and Helix turns into Omanite. But back then, it must have been a bit confusing as to what to do with these, and that you have to decide on which fossil to go with right here on the spot to even progress. You will eventually end up storing it or carrying it around for the majority of the game too, but basically, Helix is the correct choice here. So that's essentially Mount Moon in red and blue. If you aren't exactly sure of where to go, it can get a little confusing, but not so much to where you'll get lost so that you can't get back on track. If you take the quickest path through it, and if I'm remembering this right, it's only mandatory to fight 2 trainers, the super nerd blocking the fossils and the Team Rocket member right before him. It's still very early in the game, so it's not going to be too difficult or anything, but I would argue that it is the toughest part of the game thus far. If you've been flying through the game not properly leveling up the right team, you might have some trouble here. But I always thought it ended up being a pretty memorable place. It has the introduction of 4 new Pokemon of Zubat, Geodude, Paras, and Clefairy, all at varying degrees of encounter rates. And I like the whole Clefairy Moonstone aspect, the fact that this is where Team Rocket gets introduced, and you even get a fossil to keep for down the line. But we are far from done with discussing Mount Moon here. There are certainly some changes depending on your version, and the yellow version switches up a few things here. On the main ground floor, you will still run into a ton of Zubat 75% of the time, and Geodude at a less common rate of 20%. Clefairy still has a minuscule 1% rate, but you will no longer find Paras up here. Instead, Sandshrew is now found 4% of the time. Awesome. If you know me at all, you know that Sandshrew is my favorite Pokemon of all time, and that Paraspectre is not far behind. So in this very yellow version, you can get both right here in Mount Moon, essentially making the yellow version the definitive Mount Moon experience. Sandshrew is the pure ground-type mouse Pokemon who more resembles a pangolin than a shrew or mouse, with a pattern that looks like a pyramid. It is, in my opinion, a perfect Pokemon design. The yellow version Pokédex says, its body is dry. When it gets cold at night, its hide is said to become coated with a fine dew. In yellow, it is actually only found here on the main floor of Mount Moon in routes 3 and 4, so this is actually the last place in the game you will find one. Sandshrew has pretty decent defense and attack, but is pretty slow with pretty low special too. Going to the 2 floors below though, Sandshrew gets swapped out for Paras, putting the encounters pretty much back to how it was in red and blue. Everything else functions the same here, except for one big surprise at the very end. Since the yellow version is meant to be a loose representation of the anime, they actually made Jesse and James of Team Rocket a trainer that you'll fight periodically throughout your yellow journey. And just like in the anime, you'll be fighting the Pokemon they use, including Meowth, who functions as the 3rd member due to him being able to speak. But here in the game, you'll fight their level 14 Meowth, Jesse's level 14 Ekans, and James's level 14 Coughing. I honestly thought this was a really awesome addition since I was most certainly into the anime back then. The yellow version wasn't my first Pokemon experience, that would be Pokemon Blue, but yellow was the first game I purchased and owned myself, since I was borrowing the blue version from my friend Shane. So even though Meowth, Ekans, and Coughing aren't really difficult here, it's just a cool little bonus here to actually take on Jesse and James after making your way through Mount Moon. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, it's mostly back to basics here. Sandshrew is no longer here, but the original 4 are back to being what you'll find. The one little change here is that on the first subfloor, you will only find Paras 100% of the time. Very awesome. You're clearly going to want a Paras anyway, so just head on over to that part and try to find a level 10 one. For items here, you will find some new stuff for these games, like a tiny mushroom, star piece, and the 2 new TMs of Bullet Seed and Thief. Other than that, Fire Red and Leaf Green mostly stays true to the original. The trainers are roughly the same, and you'll still fight that super nerd to claim a fossil, with his name now being Miguel. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee really does change some things up though. On the main floor and just below, you'll still find Zubat, Geodude, Paras, and Clefairy. But this time, Zubat and Geodude now have a 40% rate to try and balance some things out more. Also, Clefairy is now bumped up to 4%, ooh baby. But for a rare encounter at only 1% of the time, you can also find Brock's other Rocky Boy, Onix. Onix is the rock ground type rock snake Pokemon who is a very large 28 foot 463 pound snake made up of boulders with a sinister face and one horn. The Let's Go Pokedex says, it burrows at high speeds in search of food. The tunnels it leaves are used as homes by Diglett. How sweet. You'll find Onix here, in the Rock Tunnel and in Victory Road in LGP and LGE. And for as massive as Onix is, it has very low HP, special attack, and special defense, but extremely high defense and pretty decent speed. Yeah, Onix isn't really good, but it is kinda cool that you can now find both of Brock's Pokemon here in Mount Moon. And on the further floor, the encounters stay the same, except Clefairy is now boosted to 9%, and Geodude drops a little. But also tied with Onix at a 1% rate, you can actually find Clefairy's evolved form of Clefable here, the now pure fairy type fairy Pokemon. Clefable mostly looks like a bigger Clefairy, but I think it helps to add to the whole moon lore going on here. It would make sense to run into a Clefable every once in a great while too. Clefable's Let's Go deck says, they appear to be very protective of their own world. It is a kind of fairy rarely seen by people. In Gen 7, Clefable actually has pretty good HP, special attack, and special defense, with speed being its worst stat. But honestly, Clefable is pretty well rounded statistically. I like that they added it here. And like a ton of areas in the Let's Go games, Chansey can be found here as a rare spawn, but I won't bother going over it. It can practically be found anywhere in the game if you get lucky enough. Lucky? Yeah, sure. Trainers in this game tend to have much fewer Pokemon, with most of them only having one each. Kinda makes things a little more focused, and you'll likely see some new ones like Butterfree, Drowsy, and Mankey, so that's something. Jessie and James make their return here as well, but this time you only end up fighting Ekans and Coughing, not Meowth. I guess they wanted to keep Meowth the third member of the team rather than one of their Pokemon. And of course, just like with every area in Kanto, you can revisit it 3 years later in Gen 2 and in the Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes. In this time, Mount Moon is significantly smaller. I mean like maybe 90% smaller, that's just a guess though. You'll see a sign in Pewter City about a Mount Moon gift shop being open, so that's weird. But upon entering Mount Moon, you'll immediately enter a battle with your rival who wants to fight you after you became the champion. His team consists of a bunch of low 40s with Sneasel, Golbat, Magneton, Gengar, Alakazam, and whichever starter he took at the beginning. But in this tiny area, you can certainly find some low-leveled wild encounters, all different depending on your version and even time of day. Returning are, of course, the big four, with some slight changes. In the gold version, you'll actually find Sandshrew almost as often as you'll find Zubat and Geodude. Combined, they make up 80% of the encounters. Paras is only found 10% of the time, and then Clefairy and newcomer Sandslash are 5% each. Oh yes, you can find a level 10 Sandslash here. Sandslash is Sandshrew's evolved form as the pure ground-type mouse Pokemon. Sandslash loses the pyramid color scheme that Sandshrew has, but is mostly all tan with giant sharp claws and a lot of brown spikes on its back. Its gold deck says, in an attempt to hide itself, it will run around at top speed to kick up a blinding dust storm. And yes, Sandslash is in my top 3 favorite Pokemon of all time. It doesn't quite top Sandshrew for me, but come on, it's an amazing design, I love it. Sandslash actually has really good attack and defense, but is on the lower end for special attack, special defense, and speed. And although you'll find it so late in the game here and at only level 10, it is now a wild option here in Mount Moon. If you're playing the silver version, things are back to basics here. No Sandshrew or Sandslash, and it's just the standard 4. The crystal version does bring back Sandshrew, but weirdly enough, only as a morning or daytime encounter. Instead, Clefairy is much more common at night along with the other main 3. But once you walk right on outside, you'll see a sign in a building. The sign says, Mount Moon Square, don't litter. This here is the gift shop and it's only open during the day. It's nothing too substantial, but you can buy vending machine drinks like lemonade and soda pop, as well as repels, Pokédolls, and a type of mail. But the big draw to this area is to the west of the building. If you happen to come here very specifically on a Monday night, you will see 2 Clefairy dancing in the square, and when they leave, you can rock smash the rock and get a Moonstone. It's not quite as easy getting Moonstones in Gen 2, but this is a way to do so if you remember to go here on Monday nights. Heart Gold and Soul Silver are pretty much the same as they are in Gen 2. Soul Silver has the same main 4 encounters, and Heart Gold adds Sandshrew and Sandslash, and you can still watch the Clefairy dance. The only real change here is the Gen 4 edition of the Hoenn and Sinnoh sounds you can play with your radio to attract a couple Hoenn Pokemon of Makuhita and Absol, and Sinnoh Pokemon of Chingling and Bronzor. Sort of like with Chansey in the Let's Go games, all 4 of these are found in numerous places throughout if you use those sounds, so they aren't Mount Moon specific here. And that about does it for the main games. But of course, we aren't done yet. Oh no. There is actually a Mount Moon area in Pokemon Pinball if you make your way there on the blue field. You can catch the big 4 there of Zubat, Geodude, Paras, and Clefairy, as well as Rattata and Ekans. It pretty much just functions as a setting on the pinball table, but it's still worth mentioning. Mount Moon in the anime had its big debut in the episode Clefairy and the Moonstone, which absolutely helped to add more lore to this place. In the episode, Ash and company arrive at Mount Moon, and Ash and Pikachu rescue Seymour the Scientist from being attacked by a bunch of Zubat, one of which Brock catches for his team. Seymour explains that someone is after a gigantic moonstone inside the cave, which is said to be 1,000,000 years old and can increase a Pokemon's power. He theorizes that it's a spaceship that Pokemon arrived on Earth in. In searching for it, strings of lights were put up, which is disrupting the home of the Pokemon inside. Of course, Team Rocket is behind all of this, and they try to capture a Clefairy wandering by holding a Moonstone shard. Team Rocket blasts off again as the Clefairy is freed. The Clefairy leads the gang to the Moonstone where it places the shard, and the giant stone begins to glow as a bunch of Clefairy pray to it. Team Rocket returns, and in another fight, Team Rocket steals the Moonstone. All of the Clefairy use Metronome in unison, which causes an explosion on the giant Moonstone, blasts Team Rocket off yet again, and many of the Clefairy begin to evolve into Clefable as Moonstone shards rain down on them. Seymour stays with the Clefairy and Clefable to hopefully travel to space with them. It's an alright episode, and it's actually the 6th overall, so it's very early on in the series. You don't get to see a ton of Mount Moon though, just a few cave corridors. The focus is mostly on the Moonstone, which is mostly outdoors too. But it's still always fun going back to the early days of the anime. But Mount Moon actually appeared one more time in the Ruby and Sapphire series. In the episode, A Real Cleffa Hanger, Ash and company encounter a Cleffa while visiting at the base of Mount Moon. The majority of the episode takes place there with a lot of Team Rocket shenanigans, but at the very end, a group of Cleffa, Clefairy, and Clefable head to the very same Moonstone from the 6th episode and perform the Moon Dance in front of it. It's a nice little throwback, but that's really all that happens at Mount Moon itself. Kinda cool that Cleffa got integrated into the Moonstone mix now though. In Pokemon Origins, Mount Moon is just like a half-second mention in the File 2 Cubone episode, where Red mentions battling the super nerd guarding the fossils. Yeah, Origins really does brush over a lot of the game events very quickly. Also, Mount Moon is where you find the original fossils, so it's a little surprising that this was only really ever brought up here and in the original Gen 1 games. The whole Mount Moon part of the game was about Team Rocket looking for fossils to take for profit, and Clefairy and Moonstones were just things that you may have found. As far as Mount Moon goes for the manga, I have to mention this again like I did in each of the other episodes, but my manga knowledge is next to nothing. Forgive me if I get something wrong here, but I'm just reading summaries about them because they are important to mention. It's just not my style of medium though. Way early on in the Electric Tale of Pikachu chapter Clefairy Tale, Ash and Pikachu head to the Moon Mountain Range to try and catch a Clefairy, as Ash thinks catching such a rare Pokemon will instantly get him into the Pokemon League. It turns out that Professor Oak had been living with the Clefairy here to study them for the last 3 months. After also meeting up with Bill, the Clefairy invite them to witness a special ceremony of Clefairy using Moonstones to evolve into Clefable. Each person is handed a Moonstone by a Clefairy to use on them as the 3 newly evolved Clefable fly away. Mount Moon was also mentioned in a couple Red, Green, and Blue chapters. In Gyarados Splashes In, Professor Oak tells Red and Misty that Team Rocket plans on stealing Moonstones from Mount Moon. In Raging Rhydon, yes that's the name, Red and Misty go into Mount Moon to stop Team Rocket and Koga from taking Moonstones. Koga injects his Rhyhorn with something forcing it to evolve into Rhydon, yikes, and after a battle, the cave entrance collapses, but Red manages to get a Moonstone for himself first. In a couple chapters of the Yellow arc, some events were told in flashbacks of Red fighting Bruno at Mount Moon. Bruno was under mind control by Lorelei and Agatha, and Red eventually became trapped in ice at Mount Moon. And finally, there are a couple Mount Moon references in the TCG. There's an entire sheet of Mount Moon cards in the blue series of the vending machine expansion cards. And this is a nice segue for me to throw out a mention to go watch the videos I made about every single vending machine card. You can of course find vending Zubat, Geodude, Paras, and Clefairy on this sheet, as well as the Moonstone and Fossil Excavation trainer cards. Again, I talked about all of these in my blue series video. And lastly, there is a stadium card from EX Fire Red and Leaf Green, simply called Mount Moon, that says all Pokemon with a max HP that's less than 70 cannot use Poké Powers. I don't really know what this has to do with Mount Moon, but alright. Weak Pokemon are stifled here? That's kinda lame, honestly. So yeah, that's pretty much everything involved with Mount Moon. It's certainly nowhere near my favorite place in these games, but it does stand out as a pretty memorable early game challenge. It's the place that debuts the main 4 Mount Moon Pokemon, it's your introduction to Team Rocket, and you can get one of the 2 fossils to optionally revive later on. It's also where you can find some Moonstones to evolve either Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Nidorino, or Nidorina as well. So there's definitely some significance for coming here. And come on, this is where you can start your path to get Parasect on your team. It may not be the most fun place to trek through as you're constantly bombarded by Zubat on repeat, but I still kinda like Mount Moon. The games and the anime definitely veered away from it being a place where fossils are to a much greater focus on Moonstones and Clefairy in general, but the original games have all of it. And hey, after a semi-grueling cave crawl, you get to Cerulean City at the very end, so there's that. But thanks again for checking out another Kantonian place with me. I'll end this with all of my Patreon shoutouts with their assigned cards. Thank you all so much yet again, and for the rest of you for being with me for 100 videos. It means a lot to me. Paraspectre will return.